All right, guys, it's that time of year again when we are prepping for our upcoming fall hunts. We're doing a lot of e-scouting, and a pretty common question I get is about topo maps. What use do topo maps have in e-scouting? Now, if you're a little bit older like I am, you probably remember getting the USGS topo maps and stitching those together, taping them, and building, a big, larger map for a unit that you're hunting, and you would scour over that map and try to identify areas that you might want to scout and hunt. Now we're fortunate that we have all that available via your desktop or even on your phone. And I'm going to run through today on why I think topo maps are a major benefit for you in your scouting efforts. And then even when you get out into the field, when you're using your app on your phone to navigate, those topo maps can be really beneficial to you in navigating the landscape. What is a topo map? A topo map is a representation of an area via contour lines. So there's these lines that essentially run the shape of the mountains, the valleys, the ridges, the peaks, and it essentially gives you a 3D view. In essence, it's not true 3D, but as you look at that topo map, the way those contour lines are laid in, it starts to give you an idea of what that landscape might look like. In regards to contour lines, there's a little tip that you should know right off the gate. The tighter those contour lines is, the steeper the terrain. The wider those lines are apart, the more gentle, the flatter that terrain is. So I've got my map open here. As you look at this is a prime example. If you look off the backside of this hill, you'll see how close these topo lines are, these contour lines are together, meaning that slope going off that ridge is really, really steep. On the other side of the hill, as you go off into the drainage to this northeast direction, you can see that those contour lines are much wider spaced. That gives you an indication that that terrain is much more gentle, probably a lot more navigatable. So those can be really beneficial to you as you're out working the landscape, planning your routes, even planning the time it might take you to get to the hunting area that you're trying to hit, because obviously steeper terrain is going to take longer. It's a lot more technical, but you can really use those contour lines and the distance between them to give you an idea of what that terrain looks like before you even get out on the landscape. So contour lines definitely very easily identify how steep a slope is, and that would be the first tip that I would give you. Next tip, I think topo maps are very good for identifying glassing points. It's very easy to look at a topo map and identify the highest points or the peaks in any given area. Now the area I'm looking at right here, I'm not trying to give anybody a spot. This is an area I've never been to. This is in Washington, I believe. But as you look at this map, you can very quickly identify the peaks that are along this hillside. So you've got a peak here. You've obviously got a peak here. You've got a peak here. You can start to cruise down these ridge lines and you can start to see where those high points are. So topo maps are really handy on identifying the highest point of elevation in any given area, which are your first areas that you really want to look at for establishing glassing points. You want to look at those. You can use other indications to help you understand whether it's an area you want to actually hike up and glass from. But I think topo maps are excellent at identifying those high points. And if you look at this map, you can see how those are identified. It's just those round contour lines that kind of circle the tops of the high points of these peaks. So you can see one there, you can see one here, you can see one here. So that's really handy with the topo map. If you're looking at an aerial image map, those are much harder to decode. They're a lot harder to see, but a topo map really makes those pop right out. The next tip I would give you is topo maps are great for finding ridge lines or canyon bottoms or gullies or draws. So ridge lines are these elongated either V or U shapes that are essentially pointing downhill, meaning that they're running downhill. So as you look here at my mouse, you can see these lines here, these contour lines kind of running in that U shape or that V shape, and they're running down that ridge. So right there, as I'm looking at this, I know that right here, I'm looking downhill. This is the slope here, and it helps me really evaluate and find ridge lines. Now, ridge lines are really important when you're hunting because animals love to bet on them, specifically elk. I'm a big elk hunter. They love those ridge lines because it gives them access to two canyons. Also, typically, they've got some flat spots on them. Elk like flat bedding areas. In the winter, if you're a shed hunter, you probably know that those ridge lines are great for picking up shed antlers. As you move into those winter months, they love those exposed ridge lines because a lot of the time it'll get some sunlight and it'll kind of bear off those ridges, and those elk love to lay up on those ridge lines. So topo is great for that. You just got to remember when you're looking at it, you're looking at those elongated V's or U shapes that are running downhill. Now, conversely, if you're trying to look for canyon bottoms and figure out where is the bottom of this draw, as you look at your topo map, you can see essentially those same U shapes or V shapes that are running uphill. And that's going to identify your canyon bottoms, your gullies, your draws. And that's really valuable as well. Typically water is, good to find in the bottom of those drainages. Also, those animals like those low points, kind of tuck in, find some shade for the day. But a topo map's great for that. It's great for identifying ridge lines. It's great for identifying the gullies, the slopes, and those little pockets. Now, along with those two, I think topo maps are really excellent at helping you find things like benches. So benches are like little flat spots that are on a slope. So as I'm looking right here at this map here, as I kind of scroll up through this, I can see I've got some slope that's running uphill here. As I start to see these contour lines widen out through this country here, maybe right here, as those contour lines are getting wider and wider apart. Here's another one right here. Essentially, I know that those areas are flat spots on the slope. Now, the reason I like looking for those really for elk hunting is that a benchy flat spot on a nice slope that's got some shade, I know that that's going to be a prime bedding area for elk. When the rut is on, they need that shady bench to kind of regulate their body heat for the day. A lot of the time, those bulls' cows will search out those shady benches on a north or east facing slope in the pines, and they'll kind of bed up on those benches. So topo maps are great for finding benches. Like I said, you just kind of got to look at the spacing of those contour lines within those slopes, and those benches will pop out just so vibrantly, much more so than they would on a aerial imagery map. A saddle is essentially a low point between two drainages, and those saddles are utilized all the time as animals move back and forth across the landscape. Animals no different than a human. A lot of times they'll seek out the least path of resistance. So if they're going to move from one drainage to another, they're going to find that low spot, that saddle, and they're going to kind of transition over and up through it. Mule deer, high country mule deer, are a perfect example. They love saddles. They love kind of leaking up and over through those little low spots and then transitioning into another canyon. They're great for escape cover, even, if you will. So as you look at a topo map, saddles really pop out easily. So this right here is an example of a saddle, and you're kind of looking at that hourglass shape between the contour lines right on the ridge, and that's a indication that you've got a saddle right here between two major drainages. So I like to go through when I'm e-scouting. I like to identify benches. Like I said, those are those flat spots. Those are paramount for elk, even mule deer. They love those to kind of bed up, get some shade during the day. They love a flat spot. I like to identify saddles in the unit. I like to identify glassing points. I also like to identify the ridges and the canyon bottoms, and I'm kind of getting an idea of what this unit might look like. So those are like your primary benefits, I think, for topo maps. Topo maps are really handy for deciding and looking at slope. So as I've got my map set up right here, obviously I haven't rotated. I've got north facing north. But basically, this allows me just a very quick visual of what my north-facing slopes are. Why north-facing slopes are important for me as an archery elk hunter is because those are typically your most heavily vegetated slopes. East-facing slopes are also typically really good for mule deer and for elk because those are the first slopes that are going to get the sunlight in the morning. So you've typically got better growth, better vegetation, better feed. Also, of an evening, an east-facing slope is going to be the first slope to shade out. So that sunset's in the west, those east-facing slopes are going to be in the shade. Those animals like those east-facing slopes. And I think a topo map is really nice to actually just look at the landscape and kind of identify the slope and the slope direction that you're looking at. Obviously, you've got some north-facing slopes you can see right here. I've got some southeast-facing slopes. But as you're kind of panning around and evaluating a topographic map, I think that your slope pops out really well, really nicely, and it's just another piece of the puzzle. Along with slope, specifically when you're out navigating in the field and you're looking at your map, it'll give you an idea of what your thermals are going to do. So thermals, obviously, they're going to be cool in the morning. They're going to be coming down the hill. As the slope heats up in the afternoon, it's going to be rising. And as you're looking at a topographic map when you're on the ground, those contour lines give you a much better idea and understanding of where those thermals might be drifting as the slope warms up throughout the morning. Also, as it cools down in the evening and that air kind of switches and starts to be coming down. And I think a topographic map is a really good tool for just evaluating thermals, where your scent might be blowing and how it relates to you on the ground and how the topography lays in around you. Another thing about slopes looking at a topographic map is, depending on the time of the year that you're hunting, it can be really beneficial to helping you find the animals that you're looking for. So for example, if you've got a late season rifle tag, you expect some snow, some cold weather, those south facing slopes for elk are going to be good. You're going to want to look at those because those slopes are going to warm up. They're going to have good vegetation. It's going to bear off sooner than the north facing slopes, and a topographic map will allow you to easily evaluate where those south facing slopes might be. So on a late season hunt, I think those are excellent. Also, early season, I already kind of mentioned it, but north facing slopes, you got more vegetation. East facing slopes, better vegetation, earlier shade, and really a topographic map helps you kind of evaluate all of that. Another thing that I think a topographic map does really well is that it helps you to identify water sources. So as I'm scrolling along here, you can see how these creeks really pop out. If you got a lake, you got a lake over here. If you've got a seep or a pond, often those will be shown on a topographic map. And because those are laid in over that green imagery, they tend to pop out really well. So your water sources are much more easily identifiable, in my opinion, on a topographic map. And lastly, the thing that I would say, I think topographic maps really help you to plan your route. As you're hiking, you're out navigating the landscape. Obviously, ridgelines are nice to hike. They're typically more gentle. If you're trying to avoid and get to an area, you obviously want to take that path of least resistance. So you're looking for saddles, you're looking for those contour line distances, either being steep or more farther apart, meaning that it's much more gradual terrain. And really, you can use this topographic map to plan your route and either map it in for yourself on a desktop, or you can use it in the field in your palm on your phone, and you can essentially evaluate those contour lines. Maybe you're hiking up to a glassing point. You want to see what the path of least resistance is. You can kind of use those contour lines to help yourself navigate up to your glassing point in the most efficient manner. So with that, that's my tips for using topographic maps. I think that far too many people skip this portion of it. They jump to aerial imagery. I think topographic maps are massively helpful. I would definitely spend some time, if you got a mule deer tag, if you got an elk tag, dive in, find those saddles, find the benches, evaluate the ridge lines, look for those canyon bottoms, look for your water sources, check out your slopes, because those slopes are going to indicate what types of feed they might provide, whether it's bedding, cover, or feeding areas. But really, don't skimp on topographic maps. They're massively helpful to you. Hopefully these tips helped you out. If you got any questions or think I missed anything, if you got any use cases for topographic maps that I missed, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you got. So with that, do some e-scouting, get planning, get prepped, and get ready to go hunting, because it's coming up pretty quick.